I had always prided myself on my loyalty. 2 decades of unwavering commitment. Late nights spent refining proposals. And weekends sacrificed to ensure that the company met deadlines. It had all been for the greater good. Or so I thought. That illusion shattered the moment I hit play on the video sent to me by Ryan. A young analyst I had mentored since his first day. My hands trembled as I watched. My breath caught somewhere between disbelief and rising fury. There, in the middle of the company's annual gala, stood Richard Weston, my boss, a whiskey glass in hand, surrounded by laughing colleagues. The words that followed felt like a knife slicing through my spine. "Olivia is such a worthless idiot," Richard sneered, his voice dripping with amusement. "Next month, we're getting rid of her. Mark my words, she has no clue it's coming." A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. Not forced, not uncomfortable, actual laughter. Some looked hesitant, shifting awkwardly, but no one, not a single soul, spoke up for me. My so-called work family, the same people who had benefited from my guidance, my patience, and my expertise, were watching my professional execution like it was a joke. My pulse pounded in my ears as I replayed the video. Over and over again. It wasn't just the words. It was the certainty in Richard's voice. The smug way he grinned, knowing that I was oblivious to my own fate. The ultimate betrayal wasn't just in his words, it was in the fact that no one had warned me, not until now. I gripped my phone tighter. The bitter taste of humiliation thick in my throat. Richard had always been arrogant, dismissive, even cruel at times, but this was different. This wasn't a careless insult in a heated moment. This was premeditated, planned, a decision he had made with a smirk on his face, fully confident that I would walk blindly into the news he had prepared. I barely slept that night. The shadows of my ceiling blurred as I lay awake, my mind racing between anger, grief, and something else, something colder. Determination. If Richard thought I was just going to accept my fate, if he truly believed that I would let him destroy my career and walk away unscathed, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. At exactly 7:55 a.m., I stepped into the office, my heels clicking against the polished floor, my posture composed, my heartbeat was steady, my expression unreadable. If Richard was expecting me to crumble, he had underestimated me. The office buzzed with its usual Monday morning energy, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, coffee machines sputtering out the lifeblood of corporate survival. I walked past the cubicles, feeling the weight of lingering stares. They had all seen the video. They all knew. I could hear the whispers trailing behind me, hushed murmurs filled with nervous curiosity. Richard's door was open when I passed by. He was leaned back in his leather chair, his laughter loud and unbothered as he joked with Mark, the CFO. I paused in the doorway. "Act normal." "Morning, Richard," I said, my voice smooth, polite, as if I weren't staring at the man who had just signed my professional death warrant. His eyes flicked to me, and for the briefest moment, I saw it, hesitation, a flicker of something almost like guilt. But it was gone as quickly as it came, masked by that signature smirk. "Olivia, good weekend?" I smiled, tilting my head. "Great weekend, feeling refreshed for another productive month." His smirk widened. "That's what I like to hear." "I bet it is," I murmured, then turned and walked away, my hands steady, my expression calm. Let the game begin. For the next month, I played the role of the perfect employee. I smiled in meetings, nodded at Richard's brilliant ideas, and took on extra work without complaint. If he thought I was naive, that I would simply accept my fate, he had no idea just how wrong he was. While he laughed behind my back, believing me to be clueless, I was quietly dismantling everything he took for granted. The first step was securing my future. I reached out to old clients, the ones who had trusted me, not Richard. I dropped subtle hints about potential new opportunities, and the response was immediate. Some of them had been unhappy with Richard's leadership for years. He was arrogant, careless, and utterly dependent on me to smooth over his mistakes. They listened carefully, reading between the lines. Next, I built my escape route. While Richard spent his afternoons drinking scotch and mocking me, I was meeting with lawyers, corporate competitors, and headhunters, setting the groundwork for what was coming. I made one particularly strategic phone call to Westfield and Associates, the firm that had been circling our company for months, waiting for the perfect moment to poach our best talent. They were more than interested. In fact, they were thrilled. The final step was gathering the ammunition. I knew I had access to everything Richard had taken for granted: email trails, client contracts, financial reports. I didn't steal anything. I didn't need to. I just paid attention. Every careless mistake, every overlooked discrepancy, every reckless decision hidden in plain sight, I documented it all. By the time the month was up, I had built an empire in silence, one that Richard would never see coming. And then, the day finally arrived. The air felt different when I walked into the office that morning. There was a tension, an unspoken shift, the kind that comes before a storm. Whispers floated through the hallways, cautious glances darting my way. Richard had no idea I knew what was about to happen. At exactly 3 p.m., Denise from HR walked into Richard's office. I didn't need to hear the conversation. I already knew how it would go. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. "Richard Weston, please come to my office at 3:30 p.m. There it was, the moment he thought he would catch me off guard. My execution, the culmination of his arrogant little plan. I inhaled slowly, adjusting my blouse as I stood. It was showtime. I walked into Richard's office with a pleasant smile, as if this was just another performance review. Denise sat stiffly across from him, a company-issued folder neatly placed in front of her, standard HR protocol. I had seen this play out before. "Olivia, please, have a seat," Richard said, his tone almost fatherly, as if he was doing me a favor. I sat gracefully, crossing my legs. I could already see the relief flash across his face. He expected tears, anger, confusion. He had spent the past month mocking me, believing I had no clue. He thought I was about to plead. "We appreciate your dedication to the company over the last 20 years. He began, his voice measured, his false sympathy almost insulting. "But as you know, the industry is evolving, and we've had to make some difficult decisions regarding staffing." I nodded, as if this were brand new information. "Your position is being phased out," he continued, carefully rehearsed. "But we want to ensure a smooth transition. So we're offering you a generous severance package." Denise slid the folder across the table. I didn't touch it. For a fleeting second, doubt flickered in Richard's eyes. This was too easy. "We'll need your company laptop and access badge by the end of the day," he added, trying to speed things up. "And, of course, we ask that you sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding company operations." Of course, they wanted to make sure I left quietly. I finally tilted my head, meeting Richard's gaze. "Just to clarify," I said, my voice smooth, "this decision is final?" He blinked, slightly caught off guard. "Yes, of course." A slow smile curled my lips. "Perfect." Denise's pen froze mid-signature. Richard shifted uncomfortably, sensing that something was off. "I'll start wrapping up my work then," I said calmly, standing and grabbing the folder without even opening it. He nodded quickly, still too arrogant to feel the full weight of his mistake. "We appreciate your professionalism, Olivia." I turned toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Richard?" I said, looking over my shoulder, my voice almost gentle. He raised an eyebrow. "Good luck." Then, I walked out, leaving him completely unaware that, by the end of the week, his world would be in flames. I spent the rest of the afternoon doing exactly what they expected, packing my things, offering polite goodbyes, maintaining the illusion that I was just another employee quietly exiting the company. But while they saw a woman defeated, I was pulling the last strings of my plan, strings that, by the end of the week, would leave Richard's empire in ruins. At 4:45 p.m., I logged onto my computer one last time. My fingers moved effortlessly, my actions precise, methodical, lethal. The first email was to Richard's largest client, the one that made up nearly 40% of the company's revenue. "Hi David. I just wanted to take a moment to thank you for your partnership over the years. Given my upcoming departure from Weston & Company, I wanted to let you know I will be available for consulting in the near future. If you're open to a discussion, I'd love to explore how I can continue assisting you. Best, Olivia." I hit send. That email alone was more dangerous than any lawsuit. Then, I archived every important email, project file, and contract I had ever worked on. I wasn't stealing them. I wasn't even taking confidential information. I was simply preserving my legacy, because the moment my name disappeared from their system, Weston & Company would crumble under the weight of its own incompetence. At exactly 5 p.m., I walked out of that building for the last time. I didn't look back, because Richard had no idea what was coming next. The morning after my departure, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing. I checked the screen. Unknown number. I let it ring. I already knew who it was. By 10 a.m., I had 3 missed calls from Weston & Company, and by noon, a text from Liam, the junior analyst I had mentored for years. Olivia, whatever you did, the office is in full meltdown mode. David Miller just pulled his contract. Richard is losing it. I laughed out loud. David Miller, the CEO of Weston & Co.'s biggest client. The one I had sent that polite little email to, had clearly seen the writing on the wall. No Olivia. No stability. No reason to stay. Richard had spent 20 years taking me for granted, convinced that I was replaceable. Today, he was realizing the ugly truth, that I had been the one holding everything together. And now, the glue was gone. At 2:30 p.m., my phone rang again. This time, I answered. Hello? I said, voice calm, controlled, a sharp exhale. Then, Olivia. Richard's voice was tight, forced, like he was trying to mask his panic. I just heard about David. He mentioned you reached out. I did, I said simply. A beat of silence. Richard wasn't used to me being this unbothered. Listen, he continued, forcing a chuckle. I think there's been some miscommunication. David seemed to think you were leaving to work somewhere else, and he got spooked. I'd love to clear things up. Ah, there it was. Richard wanted me to fix his mess. I leaned back in my chair, twirling my pen between my fingers. Richard, I said, my voice smooth, you told everyone I was a worthless dumbass who wouldn't see it coming. Why would you need me now? Silence. His breathing tightened. He knew exactly what I was referencing. Olivia, he started again, slower, more cautious. You know that was just office banter. I cut in, my voice dangerously light. A sharp inhale on your end. Richard. Another silence. I don't hold grudges. I continued smoothly. I just make smart decisions. And David? He made one too. I heard his teeth grit. Are you working for someone else? Ah, now he was desperate. He was trying to figure out my next move. Trying to salvage what little control he had left. I smiled. I don't see how that's relevant to you. A long silence. Then, his voice dropped into a warning tone. This isn't a smart play. Olivia, he said, we have a lot of mutual contacts in this industry. Ah, the threat. He was trying to intimidate me. He still thought he had the upper hand. And that was his biggest mistake. By Monday morning, the cracks in Weston & Company had widened into full-blown fractures. The moment the doors opened at 8 a.m., a wave of panic flooded through the office. Emails were coming in faster than they could be answered. Phone lines buzzed nonstop, and Richard was nowhere to be found. At 8:15 a.m., my phone lit up with a text from Liam. Holy crap, Olivia, Richard just stormed into the main office. He looks like he hasn't slept. I swear he's about to combust. I smirked. Good. Richard had spent years believing he was untouchable. He had always been the one pulling the strings, treating his employees like expendable assets. But today, he was learning what true panic felt like. At 9 a.m., the whispers turned into a full-blown corporate crisis. Legal was scrambling, trying to find a loophole in the contracts of the fleeing clients. The finance department was reeling, watching as millions in projected revenue vanished overnight. And Richard? Richard was making frantic calls to every executive he knew, desperately trying to convince them to stay. But it was already too late. Because the industry sharks had already started circling. At 11 a.m., my contact at Sterling & Company sent me a simple message. Clients are signing. Richard doesn't know what hit him. I leaned back in my chair, letting the words sink in. Weston & Company was hemorrhaging clients at a rate they couldn't control. And the best part? They had no idea who to blame. At 12 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered, keeping my voice calm, composed. Olivia. Richard's voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the edge of desperation beneath it. We need to talk. I smiled. Oh, what about? A pause. You know exactly what about. He snapped, his composure cracking. I stayed silent, waiting. David pulled out, and now 3 other major accounts are gone. That's millions in revenue disappearing overnight. Olivia, I need you to be straight with me. Did you? He stopped himself, hesitating. He didn't want to say it. Did I what? I asked smoothly, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make him sweat. Finally, his voice lowered into a cautious murmur. Did you orchestrate this? I let out a soft laugh. Richard, I said, I don't work for Weston & Company anymore. What happens to your company isn't my concern. A beat of silence. Then, his voice turned sharp. Accusing. You're working for Sterling, aren't you? I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because the silence itself was confirmation enough. You think this is funny? He snapped. Anger creeping in now. I tilted my head. I think it's interesting. He cursed under his breath. You're making a mistake, Olivia. This industry is small. You don't want to burn bridges. The final stage, threats. I almost laughed. You burned that bridge the night you stood at that party and called me a worthless dumbass in front of the entire company. The silence that followed was delicious. For the first time, I heard it in his voice. Fear. He knew. He knew this wasn't just bad luck. This was me. And worse? There wasn't a damn thing he could do about it. Richard's office was in lockdown. The blinds drawn shut as he and the executive team scrambled to salvage what little control they had left. But it was futile. The company was already circling the drain. At 3:15 p.m., a text from Liam lit up my screen. Emergency board meeting just got called. The investors are freaking out. There's talk of replacing Richard. I let out a slow, satisfied breath. Right on schedule. For years, Richard had masked his incompetence, riding on the backs of people like me, taking credit for our work while treating us like we were disposable. Now, the curtain had been pulled back, and the board was seeing him for exactly what he was. A fraud. At 4 p.m., the meeting began. Behind closed doors, investors and senior board members confronted Richard, their voices sharp with frustration. Richard, we've lost 4 major accounts in less than 48 hours. Do you even realize the scale of this disaster? Our stock has dropped 23% since this morning. That's tens of millions in market value, gone. Sterling & Company has outmaneuvered us on every front. What exactly is your plan? Richard fumbled, scrambling for excuses. We just need to reassure our clients. Show them that we still have the infrastructure. Richard, a senior board member interrupted. His tone ice cold. We've already spoken with our top investors. This isn't up for debate. Richard froze. The realization hit him like a freight train. He wasn't running the meeting anymore. He was being handled, controlled, discarded, the same way he had discarded me. We're initiating a leadership transition, the board member continued. Effective immediately. A sharp intake of breath. Richard's fingers tightened into fists on the table. You think this is my fault? He snapped. His voice laced with desperation. A bitter laugh came from the other end of the table. You fired the one person holding this company together. And now? She's using everything she built here to destroy you. Silence. Because they all knew. They all knew exactly who had orchestrated this. Richard's face paled. He sat back in his chair. His jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might crack. He had spent years belittling me, mocking me, calling me a worthless dumbass. And now? Now, I was the one holding the knife. At 5 p.m., an internal memo was sent to all employees. Effective immediately. Richard Weston has stepped down as CEO of Weston & Co. An interim leadership team will be announced in the coming weeks. I read it twice, just to let the moment sink in. Richard Weston was out, publicly humiliated, stripped of everything he had spent years building. And yet, it still wasn't enough. At 5:30 p.m., my phone buzzed. Email from Richard Weston. Subject: Let's talk. Oh, this was going to be good. I opened it, reading slowly. Olivia, I think we both know things have gotten out of control. I won't pretend we've always seen eye to eye. But we worked together for a long time. I know you're behind this. And I think it's time we put this behind us. Let's meet. Desperate. Predictable. Pathetic. I clicked reply. I typed. Richard, there's nothing to discuss. I already told you, this isn't fixable. Enjoy your weekend. Then I hit send. And just like that, I closed the final chapter of Richard Weston's career. But my story? It was just beginning. Monday, 9 a.m. Weston and Company was in freefall. The boardroom was in chaos. The glass walls doing nothing to contain the rising tension and panic inside. Richard Weston, the man who had mocked me, belittled me, and called me a worthless dumbass, was now fighting for his career. And he was losing. At 9:30 a.m., I received a text from Liam. Investors are demanding answers. Emergency meeting at 10 a.m. Richard looks like he hasn't slept. I smirked. Good. By 10 a.m., the entire company was buzzing with uncertainty. Executives rushed in and out of closed-door meetings. Assistants whispered nervously, and the legal team scrambled through documents, hoping for some miracle clause that could stop the exodus of clients. But there was no miracle coming. Only the storm I had unleashed. At 10:15 a.m., Richard sat at the head of the long mahogany conference table, his fingers drumming anxiously against the polished wood. All right, he began. Voice tight. Let's cut the crap. We need solutions. The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. No one wanted to be the first to say it. The first to confirm his worst fear. Finally, one of the senior investors sighed. Richard, he said carefully, this is beyond saving. Richard's jaw clenched. Don't be ridiculous, he shot back. We just need to re-establish trust with the clients. Clients? The investor interrupted, his voice laced with disbelief. Richard, we lost 4 of our biggest accounts in the last 72 hours. Weston and Company is hemorrhaging money. The stock dropped another 15% overnight. At this rate, we'll be bankrupt within a quarter. Silence. Richard's hands curled into fists. We can fix this. The CFO, Mark, leaned forward, his expression grim. How? He asked simply. Richard had no answer. And then, the final blow. The lead investor cleared his throat, sliding a legal document onto the table. We've already spoken with our top stakeholders. This is an official motion for your removal as CEO. The air left the room. Richard stared at the paper. His skin pale, his shoulders rigid. You can't do this. We already did. It was over. Richard Weston was done. And I wasn't done watching him crumble. At 11:30 a.m., I arrived at Weston and Company. Not as an employee, not as a victim, but as a warning. I walked through the silent office, where employees stole nervous glances at me, whispering among themselves. They knew. They all knew. Richard's office door was slightly ajar when I reached it. I knocked. Come in, came the gruff response. I stepped inside. Richard sat at his desk. His tie loosened, his once pristine suit now wrinkled. Dark circles under his eyes. The cocky arrogance that had defined him? Gone. He looked up at me, his jaw tightening. You really did it, huh? I tilted my head. Did what? His bitter laugh was void of humor. Don't play dumb, Olivia. You destroyed me. I didn't correct him, because he was right. Instead, I leaned forward, meeting his exhausted gaze. No, Richard, I said calmly. You destroyed yourself. His fingers twitched on the desk. But he said nothing. And then, the last thing I ever expected. I need a job. A slow silence stretched between us. Richard Weston, the man who had mocked me, who had fired me without a second thought, who had called me a worthless dumbass, was now standing in front of me. Begging. It was poetic. It was perfect. I could have humiliated him. Could have dragged him through the mud. Could have made him feel just a fraction of what I felt that night when he laughed at my expense. But instead, I just stood, smoothed down my blazer, and met his defeated gaze. No, Richard, I said softly, you don't need a job. I let the moment linger. Let him hope for a fraction of a second. Then, I let my lips curve into a cold smile. You need a lesson. His eyes darkened, but he said nothing. I stepped past him, walking toward the door. But before leaving, I turned back one final time. Good luck, Richard. And then, I walked away, leaving him in the ruins of the empire he once thought was untouchable. The storm had passed. Weston and Company was in ruins. Its once pristine reputation shattered beyond repair. The fallout from Richard Weston's downfall had been swift, brutal, and absolutely deserved. And I had never felt more powerful. I sat in my new office at Sterling and Company, a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. The irony wasn't lost on me. This office, this seat at the table, this success was everything Richard thought he had stolen from me. But the truth? He had only fueled my rise. At 8 a.m., my phone buzzed. Liam, you are not going to believe this. Emergency investor meeting. They're voting Richard out today. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile curling on my lips. Perfect. By 10:30 a.m., the headlines were already circulating. Richard Weston removed as CEO of Weston & Company. Weston & Co. faces collapse after major client exodus. Insider scandal. Did Weston's downfall begin from within? I let out a breath of satisfaction. The weight of 20 years of betrayal, humiliation, and dismissal finally lifting from my shoulders. But Richard? He was still fighting to survive. By noon, my assistant knocked. Olivia, there's someone asking to see you. I arched a brow. Who? She shifted uncomfortably. Richard Weston. I went still. For a brief second, I almost laughed. He had the audacity to show up here? I took my time, adjusting the pen in my hand, savoring the moment. Send him in. A minute later, Richard walked in, or rather, what was left of him. Gone was the polished, arrogant CEO. His expensive suit now hung loosely on his frame. His once slicked hair now disheveled. His eyes hollow and desperate. He looked at me, the humiliation burning behind his stare. You really did it. I tilted my head, feigning innocence. Did what? His jaw clenched. You destroyed me. I leaned back, folding my hands in my lap. No, Richard, I corrected, voice calm. You destroyed yourself. Silence stretched between us, the weight of his defeat pressing down on him. And then, the unthinkable happened. I need a job. For the first time in this entire war, I almost laughed out loud. Richard Weston, the man who mocked me, underestimated me, fired me in front of his cronies, was now begging. It was poetic. It was perfect. I could have crushed him. Could have made him feel the exact humiliation I felt that night at the party, when he laughed at my expense. But instead, I simply stood up, walked over to him, and met his desperate, exhausted gaze. No, Richard. His fingers twitched, his lips parted, but no words came out. I let the silence linger. Let him feel the weight of those two simple words. Then, I smiled. You don't need a job. His breathing hitched, as if for a fleeting second. Hope flickered in his eyes. Then, I let my smile turn icy. You need a lesson. His face twisted in anger. But he was powerless now. I turned, walked back to my desk, and sat down. Dismissed. Good luck, Richard. And just like that, I watched him walk out of my life for good. His empire in ruins, his name tarnished, his career dead before it hit the ground. I had won, and nothing had ever felt so damn good.